All right. Well, I think we're on. I think
You
we're
reckon?
live streaming right now.
Cool.
If you've been following us in the last while, you'll know that basically we've been attempting to live stream stuff, both Andrea and myself, via church, just in the way that we've been preaching. Coronavirus, everyone knows about it. I doubt anyone needs an update. But then we had this bright idea. Here we are. It's 9:30 p.m. in the evening for me. What time is it there for you, bro? In the UK?
Like eight, no, nine. Wait, no. What time is it? 8:30 in the morning.
8:30 in the morning, right? So if you're in the UK and you're subscribing, if you're in New Zealand or wherever, or even in the States, I suppose, not sure how that works. But hey, welcome, join us. And then we thought, hey, let's just take this newfound technology, that's in the computer, and let's make use of it to create a further sense of connectedness in this great
I'm
world that
just
we're living
sending
in.
you a comment now, Mike.
Are you?
Yeah, live chat. Just checking you can actually read it.
I don't even know where this. I don't even know where this thing is happening. Oh, there we go. Cool. Yeah, I can see it. Hey, bro.
Hey,
All right,
bro.
now
What's up? What's up?
we're commenting to each other. You can see that. That's awesome. So, as fun as that is,
Hey, bro.
um,
There's one person who's live.
sorted. So, listen, if you are around, feel free to join us. It's just throw us a comment and join the conversation. And you don't have to. No worries. We did not announce this. We thought about this exactly 2 minutes ago, and we executed. That's the one thing we got going, bro. My mother
That's
is
it.
guilty of many things, but raising sons who don't execute their plans immediately is not one of them.
Yeah,
So
impulsive is the way to
impulsive
go.
is another way to say that. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and play us in, bro. You ready?
Yeah, yeah.
You could hear that, right?
I could hear that. I could
Okay.
definitely hear that. I was
It's just
just
it was a solid lack of expression on your part. Just
well.
saying.
Sorry, yeah, I forgot we were recording this. So I was just what I was trying to do was I was trying to work out why I couldn't share this live feed to Facebook, and I realized it's because I took Facebook off of my phone. So what I'm trying to do now
Mhm.
is I'm trying to go to YouTube
Yeah, that's a
and
good
share it
idea.
just so that somebody knows that we're doing this. Because
Yeah.
I had to actually go onto your channel
Yeah.
to find out that this was happening. So that's not ideal.
All right. So what do
It
we have
didn't
to do?
send me any notifications or anything like that.
Let's see. How do we share it? I don't even know how to
Uh,
do that. How do you do that?
to Sojourner Michael Beck.
Share
Okay, I want to go into that channel.
Facebook. All right, cool. I'll share on Facebook. I'll say, join us for a spontaneous.
Hey, there we go.
It's going to say Gracenet Zoom's meeting, though. That's wrong.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Okay, this is happening.
All right. All right, there we go. This is just shared to Facebook.
Okay, I've done the same.
So I'm thinking with all of that in place, I hope we have something to talk about tonight.
Well, this is our hope every time we.
I hope every time. I mean, coronavirus. I didn't run that last episode we did, by the way, because things were moving so fast. We were talking about coronavirus like it was,
Yeah, it got
like some
outdated really
distant future
quickly.
thing. And in the just I didn't even have time to edit the thing before we went full lockdown. So
One time.
I think it was the same with you. It was kind of outdated, so I thought let me just can that all together. So I don't even know. I
No,
forgot
that's fair
what
enough.
we spoke about, but we could try going over that again.
Well, I think Do you know, it would be good to, I think, just do well, I did like 4 points, 4 ways to think about the coronavirus for my church yesterday, not as part of the sermon, but just as kind of a, by way of introduction.
Mm.
um and I think it's basically what those 4 points were a summary of the points that we spoke about in our conversation. So um
Yep.
that's I think maybe we don't spend the whole time on it. I think
Let's do
people are
it.
a
Let's
bit
kick it
sick
off.
of
I think
corona, but good to
there's never going to be a time it's more relevant, bro. Let's get
yeah. Well, I'll give you my 4 points and you can interact with them. How's
and
that?
let's work with that. Yeah, totally.
Okay. So here's point number one, that the coronavirus is not a sign that the return of Christ is imminent.
Isn't it?
No.
Ah, that's that's the one thing we had going for us.
Yeah, I know. I know.
All right. So
Well,
why not?
what I mean is that a, a friend of mine told me that he had just heard a sermon where basically the coronavirus was the opening of the sixth seal or something like that in the book of Revelation, and the clear implication from that is, this is a clear sign that the next event, that we should expect imminently, like right now, is the return of Jesus. And the reality is, it might be, and it also might not be. And
Right.
Jesus spoke very explicitly in Luke, I think it's 21, Luke 21, where he says, these things are just going to happen. There's going to
Mhm.
be drought and famine and disease. There's going to be war and rumors of war. There's going to be all these kinds of things, but these things do not mean that the end is coming. So very, very explicitly he said that we should not see every war, every rumor of war, every famine, every pestilence as a sign that Christ's return is imminent. And so we need to be very, very careful about just kind of, trying to predict the end times and all that kind of thing. So there you go.
Excellent.
Oh,
We got John. John,
hey
dude,
John, how's it going?
it's our only 2H Sojourner listener. Woohoo!
Nice,
John, bro, we
nice.
got to meet sometime, man. We got to meet sometime. We got to get you on Zoom. We got to figure out exactly who you are. So John's a good dude from South Africa, right?
Oh,
And
cool.
he knows Greg Heasley. He knows the guys
Ah,
there.
nice.
So yeah, we've been tracking with him for a while. Thanks for listening, brother. Cool. Stoked we caught you. Yeah, I mean I mean, I think that's a massive point. In fact, on Sunday, what I hit was just for a moment at least, this issue of making use of the coronavirus or any major world event to talk about not so much the end times as a particular judgment on a nation. You know, let's say this is, I mean, it'd be easy, right? It'd be easy to make the connections that you wanted to make. You know, this is a judgment upon America. This is a judgment
Yeah,
upon
you could
Europe.
basically pick whatever your bugbear is at the moment
Yeah,
with the culture and then say, aha, this is the judgment.
yeah, exactly. And of course, you got to stay away from that, because the reality is, it's we don't have any prophetic insight into that. It disregards what Jesus told us straight up when we think about the Tower of Siloam. We think about the Galileans who were suffering, and Jesus said, listen, there is a connection. There is a connection that you need to make between sin and judgment, but
Hmm.
it's the reality of common curse pointing to that ultimate final curse. The curse is just giving us a bit of an inkling, a bit of a luminescent pointer, as we said last week, the last episode. We said, you've got this massive, whenever any kind of suffering goes on, you've got this luminescent pointer. Things are not right with God.
Yeah, yeah,
It's one of those things you have to know and think about, because I mean, a lot of people, I often hear this from unbelievers, especially. They would be like, well, how can God allow this to happen? And one of them,
yeah,
I mean, there are a lot of answers to why God could allow something to happen, but one of them, obviously, is that the fall has happened,
yeah,
and things are not right with God. The
yeah,
creation is at enmity with the Creator, and there is a big war going on, and God, in His mercy, has stayed the execution. And
yeah,
yet, in some ways, you could consider it a mercy that there are realities that point us to that final judgment. And so I was looking at Lamentations, and just obviously there you have a very specific eschatological intrusion, and the reality is that comes in a very specific way to a theocracy. We have prophetic insight. We know what it's for. We know what it's about. To try to take that and apply, take the Babylonian judgment or the Assyrian judgment upon Israel or Judah, and to apply that to the coronavirus in the States, it's just like, come on,
Yeah.
it's way off base. So we got to stay right away from that.
Well, it's
And yet,
interesting. It's not only Christians who make this mistake, and non-Christians do as well. So, you know, there was a non-Christian lady who made a comment that this is a judgment on the Chinese because they eat animals, like they eat
right,
dogs.
there we go.
And so there's all sorts of things going on there. There's some racism, and there's some kind of like cultural animosity. There's this whole kind of love of animals are people too kind of thing, where it's like the sin of all sins is to kill an animal and eat it, and there's all sorts of factors going on. But again, there was this assumption, not even that God was doing the judgment, but it was just kind of the universe or the cosmos judging for that kind of thing. And so it's not only Christians who are tempted to think like this. There's a kind of weird neo-Christian, or I don't know what kind of pseudo, I guess it's like a pseudo religion that makes the same kind of assumptions, and it's bizarre. So the way I put it when I was talking to church was that it's not a particular judgment on a particular people for a particular sin. It's a general judgment on the world generally for sin generally. Like, so
and even judgment, I would, it's curse, certainly.
Curse, but I was thinking more sort of Romans 1, like the wrath of God being revealed. So
Right.
there are certain elements within a fallen world that are expressions of God's wrath. They aren't necessarily, like I said, judgments for particular things on particular people, but they're expressions of wrath. They're warning signs that the world is under a curse, as you said.
Yeah, totally. No, I think that's massive. So
yeah, just also just apologize for noise in the background. It's lockdown here, so all the family is home. It's a school morning, and homeschool starts in like, I don't know what, like a couple of minutes, but it's gonna be rowdy. So apologies if you hear straight. My son's pretending to be a chameleon, so he's growling like a chameleon because apparently chameleons growl. Did you know that?
No, I did not. We broke the news to our kids today. Hey, school not going to happen for a minimum of 4 weeks, and then probably longer than that. Oldest was shocked, mortified, didn't know what to do with herself, and my son just could not believe the greatness of the moment. He felt like it was a dream. Just shrieks of delight. He was just like, "This is the best thing that's ever happened, ever." And then same thing with my youngest. There
It's
we go.
classic, isn't it? It was basically a divide, girls and boys. The boys were delighted in our house. The girls devastated.
So,
what are we going to do now?
cool.
Anyway, yes,
Right.
judgment and viruses.
Judgment and viruses. It's a good title right there.
But it is, I thought, actually positively, like the thing about stuff like corona, we ask about why it happens, but and why does God allow it to happen? But the really important thing to remember is that the whole point of the gospel is that God is going to fix this. So this is not as it is, but the whole of creation is groaning in anticipation of the full redemption of everything. So God is bringing the whole cosmos in alignment with the lordship of Christ. And so that's going to, the reversal of the fall, bringing about a world of blessing again. Can you hear bringing about this blessing again, reversing the effects of the fall. That's exactly what the gospel is all about. So, it's not like Christians are trying to go about blindly without recognizing that there are these problems in the world. So every time someone says, oh, why does, how can God be good and let this happen? It's not as though Christians are, oh, you mean the world isn't perfect? It's like,
Mm,
oh, that is
mm.
difficult to explain. No, the whole point of the Bible story, the whole gospel, is that there is a problem with this world. We wrecked it, and God is going to fix it. So, like every time stuff like this happens, it can actually point us forward to the hope of the gospel.
Totally. Now, what do you think about those locusts in Kenya? Have you seen that?
No, no. Clearly, the locusts are from Revelation.
See now,
Did they have human faces?
No, they didn't. But I gotta say, if because we got pestilence, we got or at least we got plagues, we've got you know what what is this? Like plague of pestilence. What would you call it? Coronavirus? Pestilence? No, it's not
I
pestilence.
guess it is a kind of disease, virus.
We got locusts though. I'm telling you, if all of a sudden Apple decides, listen, you can't buy or sell without a chip on the forehead or wrist,
Yeah.
I am going dispensationalist.
Dude, they've already started testing
a bit
that.
of a warning, because we can talk all we want like this, but you know what? When we're seeing both locust plagues, like unprecedented locust plagues. I mean, have you seen those photos?
No.
That is scary, man. It's just like pure locusts. And this global
Dude,
thing.
if somebody creates a way for me to be able to store stuff in my body as opposed to just losing it all the time, I'm totally taking that option. Just telling you that now. Like, I'm absolutely happy to scan my wrist in order to get stuff done. Because the number of times I get to shops, open my wallet, to only find that my kids have taken out all my credit cards because they've been playing some like play house game. And so like I've got literally no cash on me. I've got a whole shopping basket full of stuff,
Dude, totally.
Not
Jerry
panic buying. Not that.
Jerry Will Fernandez. Chameleons growl. There we go. There we go.
Yeah, no, I'm not actually saying that chameleons growl. I'm saying my son says chameleons growl. I have no idea. My son's pretending to be a chameleon and he's growling. So,
well, I mean, it's
so I take your point, but not. Let's not make too much of the chameleons growling thing.
I don't know. I think it was profound. I was loving it. I mean, like I was.
I'm gonna have to know now. Do chameleons growl?
I don't know.
Someone has to look this up. Can someone please look it up and let us know if
Evidence
chameleons
that
actually
faith and
growl?
science truly go hand in hand.
No. But maybe don't rest that point on the chameleons growling.
If the locusts start growling, then I'm also going dispensational. Just so you know. All right.
Dude.
Jerry Will Fernandez actually gave me a great dispensational chart, by the way.
Did he?
I said I would pull it out for Sunday, but I haven't done it yet. It's somewhere in the back there. I want to put it on that wooden beam. I don't think you can see it, but we got this awesome old school dispensational chart. It's got the
if somebody asked me if it was like Apple's like, guys, in order to buy and sell stuff, you have to put a pentagram on your wrist and your forehead, then I might go dispensational.
Yeah.
Or like, yeah, well, I mean, 616.
Where was that? Yeah, I know. It's crazy. It's just like, moments like this. I remember even getting, this must have been like week number 3 or 4 of Christianity, when I think I went to a prophecy seminar or something at the Charismatic Church. And I remember there was this guy that was talking about cashless society, and there's a place in Daniel that says we'll go to and fro, I think it is, or, like we've never done before, exponentially travel will increase or something along those lines. And it's amazing how those things do just lodge themselves in your consciousness. I mean, I've long since departed from any dispensational theology, but it's there, it's in the back, just thinking
it's in the back there.
Well, you just got to keep
the
it.
Thing is, also growing up in South Africa, like that stuff was everywhere. Like it wasn't just in the churches. It would have school assemblies on it.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that mad? Like there were school assemblies about like end time stuff, I mean, you think about like the UK and the school system. Yeah, you just couldn't imagine it.
Imagine it. Yeah,
the guys from Word of Faith coming in with their disco lights and their big jeans and they're talking about end times.
Yeah, sorry, I'm overlaying. If there was a conservative version of Christianity that got hold of the school assemblies in New Zealand, it would be dispensationalism for sure. All the brethren. So I can
Yeah.
imagine it in some way. But all right. So what does John Menton say? He says chameleons are able to produce low tones, which other chameleons can hear. It's a sort of growling. There we go.
We'll
See, man,
take it.
Sojourner, you learn about science.
We'll
You
take it.
learn
We'll
about
take the
faith,
growling.
wilderness wanderings. It's all happening. It's all happening on 2H Sojourner. Oh man. See, I told you this live chat was a good idea. So Andrea and I
Great
just
idea.
joining us. Andrea and I just like we got on and we were about to start recording. We're like, why don't we just live stream this sucker?
Yeah.
Andrea came up with about 5 different reasons why we shouldn't. And then we
But
decided
we
to
did
go
it
ahead.
anyway.
Yeah. But it's fun.
Well,
I
listen,
suppose
I do have a topic we need to talk about actually.
all right, go for it.
So I don't know if anybody's seen the Bethesda Baptist Church. My church, obviously, I'm pastor of Bethesda Baptist Church,
Yeah.
and Mike's pastor of Gracenet in Wellington, and the music was played by
Um,
Andrew.
uh,
Come on, Mike.
um,
Come on,
uh,
Andrew. Nuss.
um,
Come on,
Jeremy.
you got it. Jeremy.
Jeremy
That's his name.
Casella of Indelible Grace and Indelible Grace. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but we've got, we normally, like, about twice a year, we have these kind of what we call guerrilla Christian events, where basically we try and address we take the reasons for God, Tim Keller, and we take one of those topics and we address it, trying to just help remove some of the defeated beliefs in our society. So, we've been looking at trustworthiness of the Bible. We've been looking at suffering, all that kind of stuff. But the next one to come up was hell, and that one was due. It's due on Wednesday. So obviously, with all that's going on, we couldn't have the event. But rather than cancel it, because we'd lined up, we've got my brother-in-law actually is giving the talk, and then we'd done all this publicity, so we thought, what, we're just going to live stream this event. So we put it online, put it on our Facebook page, done a little bit of promotion with it, and we've been getting so much angry hate mail. The question is, how can a loving God send people to hell? We deliberately asked the question that way because that's the way people ask the question of us. If God's loving, how can he send people to hell? So and this is a big problem for some people. It's one of the the logical inconsistencies of Christianity. Man, we've been getting trolled, like properly trolled.
Wow.
So it's interesting that that it's evoked so much passion in some people, and it would be good to talk about hell from a Christian point of view, and talk about that question. Obviously, we're going to do, our church is planning on dealing with it in a bit more detail on Wednesday night, but it'd be good to just iron out a few of the kinks by way of preparation for that.
So what are you hoping to be able to reinforce there with people?
Well, the idea, it's basically to see it, that actually it is very consistent to have both a view of hell, a doctrine of hell, and the doctrine of a loving God, and hold those two together. That's the idea. So it's to remove the defeated belief that that's a logical inconsistency that would stop you from looking into Christianity any further. Actually, to get people to see that judgment is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of the ways I've heard it explained, which I thought was really helpful, was that it would be weird if there wasn't a hell in some ways, because I mean, thinking, okay, we can get the justice element and there are all sorts of analogies to bring that out, but even just on the love element more than the justice, if you, for example, had to see something, someone attacking your loved one, let's say in the street or something, threatening their lives or whatever it was, if you didn't feel hateful or wrathful, maybe let's use that word, towards them, angered maybe is just the straight up word we want to use. If you didn't feel a deep sense of anger compelling you to to certainly defend, but also go against that person, um, then there would be no love, right? Well, that's what it would indicate, that you did not love whoever it is that you're looking upon seeing assailed. And I think even just on human terms, where we got practically no righteous going on, and we're all just completely messed up from beginning to end. Even we in our fallen condition can see that if someone wants to threaten your child, for example, there is an anger that rightly comes up. It would be totally weird if you didn't have that, or if you felt like, oh, whatever, just do whatever you want with my kid. And so I think, if just that dynamic alone, imagine that with an infinitely righteous, holy God at the end of the
Yeah.
day. If there
Yeah.
was not a kickback to sin, which is the worst crime imaginable,
Yeah.
it would show that there is no love for the dignity of humanity, for creation as a whole. It would indicate something's deeply flawed, if anything, in the character of God. So that's always something that's helped me a lot.
Yeah. Well, I think that exactly, because what it sort of gets to is that right off the bat, that sort of question has two difficulties that you have to kind of get around. And the one is, what is love? And the other is, what is hell? And both of those things are grossly misunderstood today. So, the the biblical idea of love that you're getting at there, where love is not happy with evil, love does not delight in doing wrong, and is not happy with lying and evil and deceit. you know the idea of love and light, they necessarily go together. You can't be loving and also love darkness at the same time. You can't love hatred and sin, and so there's a kind of biblical view of love that's very much at odds with a kind of popular notion of love, where
Mm,
love is a kind of feeling of acceptance for other people, no matter what they do, no matter what they're like, no matter what they're doing in the world. So you kind of, in order to love someone, you have to approve of them totally without any exception.
mm,
That's the kind of notion. So I have to love everything about you. I can't correct you, rebuke you. I can't punish you. I can't shame you. I can't do anything like that, and be a loving person at the same time. So you see this classically with ethics to do with sexuality and stuff like that. The
yeah,
argument that if you cannot accept my ethic of sexuality, you do not love me. You are not a loving person.
yeah,
Um, and there are all sorts of issues there that we
mm,
need to talk about, but also the notion of hell. I mean, when you talk about hell, it is depicted, especially in medieval kind of artwork and Dante's Inferno and stuff like that. Someone was telling me the other day that they were looking at a bit of artwork from medieval period, and it was basically about Satan eating people and then pooping them out, and then eating them again and then pooping them out again and stuff. So that was like,
what,
that, you know, and you just kind of think like, where does that even come from?
yeah,
And that's what happens, friends, if you abandon sola scriptura. But the whole notion of hell basically is depicted as this place of extreme cruelty, and God is not cruel. The Bible never depicts God as cruel. Hell
mm,
is not a place of cruelty. It's a place of punishment, and it is a place of torment and suffering, because it's not pleasant to receive that but it's justice fundamentally. you
mm,
know the whole idea of final judgment, the whole idea of hell, is that people get what they deserve.
mm,
um, the other notion that I think is probably worth talking about is that a lot of Christians carry around, which I'm not sure is correct, is the idea that final judgment is equal for everyone. In the sense that, there's this blanket, everybody gets chucked into hell, everyone is experiencing the same amount of suffering. Even Mrs. Smith down the road, who doesn't believe in Jesus, but is generally a good citizen and loves her family and looks after her cats and that kind of thing. Like,
Mm,
she's going to be in there and experience the same degree of suffering as, you know, your tyrants and dictators from history.
mm.
And I just think that's very worth talking about, because I think that portrays a false sense of God's justice.
Yeah, totally. Well, here's a text. John Menton just sent this through. Romans 12 verse 9. Let love be genuine, abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good, love
Mm.
one another with brotherly affection, outdo one another in showing honor. You've got this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And you can add to that sort of classic wedding passage in 1 Corinthians 13,
yeah, yeah,
which you often overlook, but it's love is not happy with evil,
yeah,
Um,
totally. Coming back to your degrees of punishment, here's a crazy idea. I'll just kick this around. Now, I wouldn't preach this. I wouldn't necessarily. I haven't formulated this, so everyone just relax if
this
they're
is
hearing
this
this.
is coming off the front burner.
Front burner, live streaming, no edits. So this is the kind of thing I would normally edit, by the way.
This is this is the kind of thing you start to get really nervous about. Someone's about to give you heresy, but they just don't want to be held accountable for it.
I've always been fascinated about the idea. In fact, talk about heresy. I actually did first, to be dead honest. I think I did first get this idea from Ellen G. White, who is the
Ooh.
Seventh Day Adventist founder.
First
Which
dispensationalism and the locust, not Ellen G. White,
I'm
bro.
telling you, loose
It's been
cannon.
it's a
Loose cannon.
it's been a rough Monday, hasn't it?
Well, it's been a it's been a rough journey altogether, man. And tonight I hear that chameleons can growl. Uh,
In a very low tone.
you thought you were safe out in the wilderness, and then you found out that chameleons
It's
growl.
it's more of a growl than a growl.
A low tone, a low tone that others can experience. Right. So um, there is this thought that I sort of abandoned after realizing Ellen G. White was who she was and whatnot. I mean, it was like my first Christian book, so you got to cut me some slack. Wasn't even a Christian book, turned out, but first book after the Bible that I read, and and then I sort of picked up the idea again in Augustine, who plays around with it as well. And I think, although I'm going to get some serious talk about hate mail, I'm going to get some hate mail if I say this incorrectly, but I think Klein has something like this in his theology as well. I remember seeing it, being amazed by it, and then forgetting it. So I have to go back and look at that again. But this might have some way to help with the degrees thing. I've always found this to be something that is potentially helpful. If you think about the concept, just working with what we know to be thoroughly biblical, um, hell is God's wrath, right? It's not
Mhm,
it's not
mhm,
some pulp fiction version of whatever the world has made hell to be, a party or a fire or a little place with a little red guy or whatever it is. Hell is God's wrath. Satan faces God's wrath. Anyone at enmity with God faces his wrath.
mhm.
And at the end of the day, you are, if you don't have a mediator, it's really what hell is simply to be in the presence of God. you know um
Interesting.
it's just it's
So
it's
that
just
would be like the exact opposite of the normal depiction of hell as being cut off from the presence of God.
right, exactly. Now, in some sense, I would agree. I mean, obviously, you are cut off from God's presence to bless. I think Grudem brings this out well in his systematic. He
Mm,
says, you've got to think about God's presence in terms of everywhere. Obviously,
mhm,
he's omnipresent, and that's true of hell as well. But there are senses in which he's present in different ways, and he's present to bless, present to curse, present to judge, present to glorify, etc. And so, I don't want to compromise on any of that or call any of that into question, really. But there is just this reality, and I think Horton always brings this out well, where we want to. It's almost like we've got this theology of glory with its various step ladders. That whether it be philosophy, whether it be legalism, whether it be this or mysticism,
mhm,
we're all
mhm,
trying to find our way up to see God, the naked God. I think, as Luther put it. And the whole thing here is that actually God came down to us because not that we could get up to God, but if we could and see him without a mediator, this would be hell, not heaven. But because he's come down and because he's mediated for us, he reveals God's presence in such a way that we're not crushed. we're not unable to screen ourselves from his righteous fury. That's a phrase from John Gill as well. Just again, something happened at the fall where we were made naked. The image was fractured or marred or removed, however we want to process that, but we are unable at that level to screen ourselves from God's righteousness in light of our transgression and in light of the covenant of works. So those things I'm sold on. It's like I don't feel like I need to move on any of that. And so with that paradigm in play, I think you can just simply say there is at some level going to be, anyone who is not mediated for is in deep trouble on that day, because they will see God without a mediator. Burning, even, I think can be accounted by the idea of God's unveiling of his own glory, because for someone to behold and witness the glory of God, as is often said, in scripture, it's not going to go well for you as a sinner.
At the best of times you fall down trembling as though dead.
Exactly. God is a consuming fire. There's going to be a consuming reality about that.
Even the presence of angels does that to people. Imagine how much more the presence of God himself.
Right. So imagine God then and his presence as a consuming fire, simply accounting for the fire imagery in hell. And really, we're not talking about God being away from it, but we're using that imagery of Revelation, where it speaks of they were, night and day tormented in his presence, in the presence of the Lamb, except not as the mediator. Now, with that in place, so it kind of what that means is really the same historical unveiling that takes place at the parousia. Jesus returns, the glory of God is revealed, the upper register, to use Kleinian thought, there is unveiled. We see the creation as it should be. Those without mediation are brought into the state of torment. Obviously, we're all in resurrected bodies at that point. We are, either going to live in the blessing of that mediated presence or the torment of that unmediated presence for all eternity. And so
the eternal destiny of all people is to live in the presence of God
exactly
for eternity, and that will either be a blissful experience if you are clothed in the righteousness of Christ, atoned for by the blood of the Lamb, given your white robes to wear, or you're those without a mediator who are still tainted by sin.
Exactly. And so now maybe there's a way that helps, or maybe it doesn't help, but to think about degrees of punishment.
Right. So just as a knee-jerk reaction, I think that is closer to the truth, certainly of kind of doctrinally speaking, than the standard way evangelicals put it, of being eternally cut off from separation from God. Because actually when you read about hell in the Bible, it doesn't really talk about being cut off from God so much as it speaks about being a place of active punishment.
You want to get away from priceless eternity, for sure.
So I think that's a common, it's certainly where I am, it's very common to hear evangelicals speak about hell as though it's eternal separation from God. And I think actually the way that you've just articulated, where eternal life after the resurrection will be a place of eternal life in the presence of God, one way or another. It's just whether or not that experience will be of the experience of judgment or the experience of blessing. So I think that my knee-jerk reaction to that actually it does come closer to historic, typical Reformed doctrine of hell. But the degrees of punishment thing, I think that because people talk about, where are their degrees of reward? Where are their degrees of punishment? Are we not just all blessed with the same blessing? Are we not just all cursed with the same curse? But especially when you get to judgment, I think there are passages in the New Testament. I'm not sure that I think we mentioned this briefly once before, but I think we have slightly different views on it. But I think there are passages in the New Testament that speak about reward. I'm not expecting to be rewarded with the same exact reward. I'm not exactly, as someone like the Apostle Paul, I'm not exactly sure what that means. That might mean just kind of positions of responsibility within the new creation, within the new order, or it might mean sort of, I don't know, a bigger mansion. I mean, I don't know. I have no idea what it is, but whatever it is, I know I'll be stoked to be there, and I'm not expecting to get the same as everybody else. So I think though, when you get to punishment, this becomes especially clear, because the whole notion of justice in the Bible is that the punishment fits the crime, right? Eye
Mhm.
for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That was the whole notion of justice set up in God's law that has shaped the way that Judeo-Christian societies have thought about justice. So basically, if you don't have a punishment fits the crime view of justice, then it does beg the question, where did that view of justice come from? Because the whole notion of justice given to us in God's law is eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. The whole thing about the gospel is that it transcends that justice and goes into mercy and grace. But that the belief of hell as being fundamentally that time when people receive justice, I think necessitates a view that the punishment fits the crime. So um, the the little girl, for argument's sake, who grows up in, you can't even say China anymore, there's more Christians there, who grows up in the UK, right? And never hears the gospel, never hears about Jesus, and and then dies, is not going to receive the same degree of justice, punishment, as the person who's sort of grown up, knows all about the gospel, rejects Jesus, hates Jesus, and becomes a satanic high priest, male stripper, prostitute, child trafficker. Like I just, yeah, boom, just like that.
That's
It,
oof.
it came so easy as well. But I just think, I think surely that you can see, just if you had to take those two people within the Jewish law, right,
Hmm.
they would not receive the same punishment.
Right.
There were severe punishments for severe sins. And I think that the notion that all sins are equal, I don't think is true. I think in the same way that there is a hierarchy of obedience within the law, and some laws supersede others on occasion, there is a hierarchy of disobedience. There are greater sins.
Mm.
And so I think this is why you see this most clearly when the Bible talks about false teachers.
Hmm.
Teachers are judged more harshly than the rest. Blackest darkness is reserved for the false teachers. In 2 Peter, Jesus says, I think also Matthew, sorry, in Luke, I think it's 21 as well. He talks about false teachers being judged, more harshly. And so I think there is, especially for the more you know, the more you're responsible for.
Yeah,
You know, So
totally.
anyway, I think that these notions are very important, because to view everyone as just being dropped into this equal punishment, this pit of fire where the demons are poking at you with things and everything, and for all eternity, um, I think is very misleading caricature of hell. And we need to just understand that that's what people think,
Yeah.
because media, movies, uh, even Christian traditions have portrayed it that way. And so you have to undo a lot of that. And know, when you think of hell, think of justice.
Yeah.
And when you think of justice, think punishment fits the crime.
Totally. And I wonder if we just had to continue with that paradigm, I suppose, that I was proposing a little bit earlier, and just thinking about one possibility that's often um, brought to the table in terms of what rewards could look like. And now, again, I'm saying could and maybe and might, because I think everyone just is aware that we are kind of out on a limb and we don't really ultimately know. But
Yeah.
we want to bring our theology to bear on it as much as possible and get as much clarity as possible. So, one thing that might happen is that in order for there to be both rewards, tremendous rewards, degrees of reward in eternity in terms of heaven, and yet there to not be a compromise on happiness and bliss for all. And, that's a hard concept for us to grasp at some level. But one of the ways it might work is that we simply all have a degree of fullness, to use that term. I think the illustration I've heard once is that of a balloon. You know, we all have a full balloon, even though the balloon can be full at different, there can be different degrees of fullness. But every balloon, so to speak, is full, and so no one is feeling that they don't have a full balloon, if I could put it that way. Now again, you know, I'm not entirely sure that's the way it's going to work, but if it does work that way, really what we're talking about there is the degree of apprehension of who God is, you know.
Mm, mm,
And at some level it makes sense, because you think about the angels, and there's, you know, angels that are there right by the throne of God, crying holy,
mhm.
holy, all eternity. I mean, there is a sense of that that's not where everyone is, and who would, well, I mean, that would be, you know, amazing. And Jesus, of course, is at the right hand of God. um, there is there is a lot there that resonates with the greater biblical picture. um, just putting the inverse on that picture in terms of hell, it might simply be the case, if God is a consuming fire, and we are looking at the reality of God's own presence coming against those who have sinned, and the sin itself, and the sin is united to the sinner at that point. That's what the
Mm.
Lord does. It will unite your sin to you. So no
Yeah.
longer are you a sinner who sins, but you are the sin. You are forever united to that. So as you were saying earlier, just to work on that same paradigm, I mean, you know, if there is a sin that, let's say, in the Mosaic law would require stoning, you know, and another sin that would require some other kind of punishment, based on a similar sort of understanding, uh, you know, you might just apply that same rubric, that the fire of God's holiness and reality, as it confronts sin, is going to have a different level of burn, if we could put it
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
and at that, you know, it's not that anyone is without torment in hell,
No.
but you know, it's just, it's almost, it feels kind of obvious that someone who has sinned more grossly, who has rebelled against God more thoroughly, is going to have have that consuming reality affect him in ways that are deeper and more tormenting than those who have perhaps not sinned as at that level. So you know, we're I think those are some ways to look at it, and I wouldn't come down 100% on that, but I think that's probably one of the more compelling rubrics.
So I've just seen that Greg Heasley
Greg
uh,
Heasley, dude.
has yeah. So hey, Greg, it's good to see you. Um, he's asked a question though. What are your thoughts about hell being a kind of eternal isolation? I think Keller speaks of this idea of being eternally alone with my sinful nature and selfishness. Does that come from? That
Yeah.
comes from Lewis, doesn't it?
um I'm not sure, to be
So
honest.
uh, I think that might be a C.S. Lewis idea, that or a version of a C.S. Lewis idea. But um, also just responding to John Menson's comment, say hell reigns when wherever there is no peace with God. Um, so that I think sounds, I don't know what John's point is, but that seems to accord with what we're saying as far as I read it. You know, so if you do not have peace with God and you're in his presence for all eternity, then you are in God's presence, but
Yeah.
that is hell.
Yeah.
You know, it's eternal strife with God, if you like.
Yeah.
But you know, so just to come back to it, I think uh, I think that the you know the whole self isolation thing, the whole C.S. Lewis thing. So someone said on our response, one of the responses to our advert was, um, you know, God doesn't send people to hell; we go there ourselves.
Right. Yeah. The luck from the inside thing.
Yeah, which I think is the C.S. Lewis idea as well. So
Yeah.
he's like, basically, we're only in hell because we refuse to leave.
Hmm.
You know, we're
Something, I mean, you know, it's interesting. And let me say about Killer, just before we make any other remarks, what I really
yeah.
appreciate about Killer, even if we end up agreeing with him, is that here is a man who's trying his best to be to communicate. I know a lot of people hate Killer for this, but I think it's right. What he's trying to do is find ways to communicate hell to a postmodern
Mm,
generation, to a generation who essentially has that kind of, you know, red guy in a fire mentality,
Exactly.
or
Yep.
some fundamentalist hangover that they're bringing through. And we've got to. I just agree with the tactic that we have to find ways to get past, almost like the homosexuality question.
Yeah.
Does and again, Keller is good on this, and
He's
that's
not just good, he's Jedi on that.
yeah, true. And I think that Jedi-ness comes through on the hell question for him as well. So,
Well,
often it's the case where I initially see Keller saying something and I go, oh,
yeah.
I definitely don't believe that. But then I get to see what he's doing, how he's trying to get there, what he eventually says, and the context that he's in. And I end up feeling, okay, I probably would have gone the same way. And actually that's quite clever. So, but in
Yeah.
terms of the isolation thing, I mean, I suppose the knee-jerk problem I would have with that is just something of the whole it's not an active torment, which I think is the picture we have in Revelation, certainly. But again, if we have a judgment of any sort in scripture, I mean, you have very much God, the action of God bringing about some sort of suffering. So it would be the only time we read of something of God's judgment. It's supposedly the worst of God's judgment where that doesn't happen. And then the other thing is, whatever we say about hell, we got to say about the cross. We've got to keep that paradigm in mind as well, because
Yes.
essentially Jesus suffered. I think we can affirm the Apostles' Creed at that level. He descended into hell in the sense that he descended into the full state of God's wrath
Yes.
poured out upon him. So, certainly there was no demon poking Jesus in the fire, right? That wasn't what
Yeah.
was happening at that point. That was the act of displeasure of God against Jesus. Now, certainly that idea of self isolation is true. Oh, sorry, not self isolation. I've got coronavirus on the mind. Oh well, is that the way you could put it?
Self-isolation.
Please tell me you didn't say self
Yeah.
isolation. No. What does he say?
This would be a great moment to misquote Mike and make sure it
Total
hits the
isolation, not
headlines.
self
Mike, are
isolation.
you saying the coronavirus is hell on earth?
Well, no, not at all. But it's pointing to hell. So there's that.
Yeah, there you go.
Um, but so one of the things there is that of course it's true that there is isolation. Think about Jesus; he is away from the presence of God to bless, right? So there's that
Mm.
sense in which he's isolated from God's love and presence
Yeah.
and favor. Likewise, the whole trapped from the inside thing is
Yeah.
also true in the sense that it's not like somehow when we're resurrected we're all regenerate, and that if given an opportunity we
Yeah.
would
You'll
repent.
still refuse to repent.
Still refuse to repent. In that sense, it's always you, right? It's
Yeah.
always you who is not repenting, who hates God, who's compounding his sin. Certainly that will continue all the way through hell. I think that's one of the good reasons for
Yeah,
saying,
that's right. I think that's important because we sometimes imagine people sort of like bang the doors trying to get out, as if like, oh, I'm so sorry, God, I'm so sorry, please forgive me, but God won't forgive them, and I don't think that is the picture. I think there's certainly a kind of desiring to be out of hell for the sake of relieving suffering,
"Hmm,
to escape prison, um to escape torture or torment. But it's not in the sense of seeking to reconcile with God. I don't think. I don't. There's no. All of the references Jesus makes to people who are experiencing God's judgment is that they still refuse to repent. This has always been the case,
yeah,
from the Old Testament all the way through. So unless we're regenerate, we're not going to. That would be us. We would be in that position.
yeah.
We'd be hating God and kicking against him, rebelling against him, and we would continue to do that for all eternity. So in that sense, there's a truth to it.
Mm, mm, totally.
But
The danger is, of course, that you bring that Arminian rubric to bear on that whole thing, and
yeah,
then you start actually altering the whole idea with hell itself, and almost it just backlogs the question involved. I mean, really, whether you're actually having to deal with the reality of predestination at that point at some level. So, I think that if you keep the basic Calvinistic rubric, I would certainly say all those things are present. They are locked from the inside because of their own desires, but that's not the full story. They are isolated from God's presence to bless, but that's not the full story. They are eternally separate from Christ as mediator, but that's not the full story. There is also an active pouring out of God's wrath, which is, again, we have eschatological intrusions that show us what that will be like. I mean, we got the flood, you've got Sodom and Gomorrah, you've got the Babylonian judgment upon Judah. You've got the Assyrian judgment upon exile. These are, Assyrian judgment upon Israel. You've got these as absolutely terrifying realities. And so I think I wouldn't want to sanitize the picture too much or make it seem as though, I mean, if you think about the covenant curses, I don't know if you've ever done this, but think about Leviticus and see what happens in Lamentations where mothers eat their children. And, you know, and there's rape, there's cannibalism, there's, these horrible, horrible moments described there as a working out of the covenant curses. I mean, what are those things if not there to actually scare the bejeebers out of us, to put it mildly, and to speak about a true horror, let alone the objects of horror like locusts, that come along and just take everything away. There is They are frightening pictures, and not to mention, we don't even have to go to Revelation to talk about, all those things that are spoken of in terms of the tribulation. The idea of calling the rocks to fall upon us rather than face the presence of the Lamb. It feels like isolation doesn't cover all of that ground for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so
No, I think that's right. So it's going to be a horrible experience, but it's going to be a justly horrible experience. And I think somehow we've got to get that. So one of the things, just speaking about the isolation, so one of the things I've wondered about, so we're talking about hell being in the presence of God for eternity, but without a mediator, without that regeneration, without that forgiveness, without the atonement, without the peace that we have with God through the gospel.
Mhm.
Um, but in Revelation, the main sort of image that's used, so you do have the kind of the pits of fire and sulfur that the dragon is thrown into, and that's sort of been prepared for Satan and his angels, and they get chucked in there. And I think it's true that people go in there as well, I think, in the end. So you have that image,
Yeah.
but actually the main image, certainly as you get towards the end of Revelation, is the idea of the city, the New Jerusalem, the new creation, new Zion, all kind of rolled up into one image.
Mm.
And then you have outside of the city where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder, now obviously we have to be careful. Revelation, lots of symbolism, lots of imagery, sometimes rolled into one, not necessarily painting a picture of what exactly it's going to be like,
Mm.
but these images are drawing on biblical metaphors and biblical events in the past to help us understand something.
Mm.
But that idea of being safely locked in,
Mm.
so kept safe within, in this kind of happy, no worries, nothing out there can get you. There's no more Babylonians, there's no more Romans, there's no more Diocletians, there's no more, anyone who's going to come and attack the people of God. You're safe in the city of God.
Mhm.
But then this notion of being outside where you're not safe,
Yeah.
and and I wonder how that factors into this. So what does it mean to be locked outside the city for all eternity?
Well, and just what I think of when you say that is, think about Cain, right? Really the first exercise of common grace and the common grace structures that God had put into place. The stay of execution was shown in Cain, full throttle. I mean, here he is, he kills his brother for worshiping correctly, essentially. It's terrible. And then God says, all right, here's the deal. You're going to be exiled. You're going to be a wanderer. And he goes, my punishment's too much to bear. And all he has in mind there is just that there's going to be no justice. There's going to be
Mm,
this blood feuding. You'll never be able to do anything. He'll, just live in constant fear. He'll have no rest, essentially. It forms quite a vivid picture of what, certainly the anarchy that would prevail if it wasn't for common grace. And then God, as Klein argues, puts the mark on him, which is not a mark, it's the oath. The mark is translated, it can be translated oath, and that oath is the very oath that brings about Cain's entrance into the city, common grace city. So the idea there is that God stops this endless anarchy and blood feuding and terror but all that terror would have been, and that's not even a final judgment. That's just simply without common grace. So I think it's exactly the same paradigm. I mean, if you had to imagine that just in time, that would be an inconceivable reality. I mean, we get a little bit of it now, right? With coronavirus and stuff, you just rarely get a sense for the grace that God has given to cities and the world, as evil as it is, through these structures that it has, through its facilities and governmental authority, and we're able to actually deal with things to some extent, and feel a sense of safety, and an ability to do this right now. I mean, we've got internet, you've got infrastructure of some sort, which we wouldn't have at all. We just have pestilence, disease, everything, crime. It'd be like zombie land, full on.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's everything about that speaks about that which is to come, and I think the flood is certainly a removal of that common grace for the sons of Cain, the Nephilim, etc. But it's more than that. It's an
Yeah.
pouring out of God's wrath also once his head is removed. So it's almost like it's that and more, is where I want to go with it.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
the baseline is, yes, you're out of the city, and then once you're out of the city, it's not like you're waiting for some zombies. You're facing God and his eternal glory. um, Try and deal with that.
Yeah, we so often forget about common grace, you know. So often forget about it. Like, this world would be a very different picture if God's grace wasn't actively involved in sustaining it and keeping it from descending into madness. You
Yeah.
know, we so often forget about that. And so the absence of common grace, which means that the full, sinfulness will go out. So if you think about it, sort of, how often does God's common grace stop the seed of murder, hatred, from
Mhm.
becoming murder?
Oh, absolutely.
And how often does God's common grace stop the seed of adultery, lust, from becoming adultery? You
Mm,
know,
mm,
and the seed of sort of theft, as covetousness, from becoming theft. So often God's common grace prevents us, and we're blissful. Well, not blissfully, but we're just totally unaware of it. We're like a kid who doesn't recognize how much their parents are doing for them.
even
Spoiled
in
brats.
hell, we mentioned earlier that if there are degrees of punishment in that
Yeah.
regard, even there, I mean, remember, it's total
Yes.
gravity. The only reason we're not as totally depraved as we could be is because of God's mercy and common grace. So even there, you don't get away from the election predestination problem. Even if someone is receiving a lesser punishment, it's only because God's grace kept them from falling into that full depravity. So it's interesting how those ideas carry through as well.
Mm, yeah. And then you take that away, and you imagine that every seed of sin reaches full flower.
Mm,
But in addition to that, you have the active presence of God in all of his purity and holiness as a blazing fire,
yeah,
condemning those actions.
yeah.
You know.
Well,
Um,
I was listening to Glory Cloud the other day, and Todd Bordeaux made a good point. He was saying, just in terms of the difficulty of considering, and this would be right to your original question again. Often the people asking the question, how can a loving God send people to hell? That comes to the fore when they're thinking about their own family members, and they don't want to become Christians, because half of the thing is there that they're going to have to admit at some level that those family members that they've loved essentially have died without Christ, and they're consigning them in their minds to this eternal hell. Now, obviously, we don't know what happens on the deathbed. We don't, anything could happen, and it's
yeah.
probably not a wise move to get too rigid on that anyway. But it's true that that is at some level going to be a reality for people. How can it be heaven then, to look upon your loved ones on earth and to see them in this state, and to, or at least know that they're in the state, and yet be in eternal happiness? And I think we've got a whole lot of answers we normally go through at that point, but and we can't begin to imagine what it would be like to be perfected, so let's not go there. We'll be on God's side. I think we got to say that. But I
Yeah.
think one of the insightful points that Todd made was just that at that point common grace will be removed. Now we only ever see people through the lens of common grace. uh, we will see people as they are. We'll see hatred for God as it is,
Yeah.
rather than masked at some level, or contained or restrained. If we think about Thessalonians, um, you know,
Yeah.
while common grace is keeping things going.
So John Menton, he's full of quotes. Like he's already quoted Lewis to us, and now, but there's I assume VOV means Valley of Vision.
Yes.
So read this morning in the Valley of Vision, if thou dost not hold us back every moment, we should be devils incarnate.
Come on.
There we go. Preach. That's what I'm saying.
There we go. Oh, I'm seeing Greg liked what we were saying as well. Thanks, Greg. And it was so good seeing Greg online live streaming. That's the cool part of this live streaming stuff.
It is cool. Yeah.
Everyone's church service. It's awesome.
Totally.
Like
well, actually, it was so great yesterday because like the number of churches that are suddenly putting stuff on Facebook, on the internet, and you kind of think, man, maybe we should have done more of this before, not necessarily live streaming services, but we're just flooding the internet with Christian content. And I think that's a fantastic thing to do,
yeah.
Like how many sermons have been accessible now directly to people who, our friends and contacts on Facebook who would never have stepped foot into a church building,
Oh, and even if they just wanted to suss out what it might be like to go to church, they can do that on the slide. It might give them a little bit more courage to actually head out there.
That's right. Yeah. And like, who would, actually come to an event? How would a loving God send people to hell? But you might secretly from your living room.
Oh, dude,
you might listen to
trolls and you might win a troll.
Oh, definitely going to get some trolls. Yeah. I need to find out how to block comments and ban people before I go on that.
Yeah. I learned that today. It's just a little thing. It's just a checkbox. All right. Hey, it's getting on to 1 hour and 20 minutes on my time. Yeah. I don't know how long we actually streaming today. So let's call it a day. Otherwise, this is going to be like the largest file ever. Hey, again, we just spur of the moment decided to live stream this just because that's what we're doing. So we got the button ready to go. So we might just carry on doing this. What do you think?
Can certainly give it a crack, bro.
This time on Wednesday, we're usually, if you want to meet us, don't know what you're doing, John. Feel free, join us. It's cool to have you in the moment with us. And yeah, I mean, look, no big agenda, you know how we roll, but it'd be just great to chat things through. And another way to stay connected, and another way to just keep thinking, keep studying theology while we've got some extra time now actually to do that. Hopefully most people will have a little bit.
And if you would like to join the live stream event that I'm doing on well, it's gonna be Wednesday night 7:30 at my time, which is what is that, like Greenwich Mean Time?
On your Facebook. You just need to get onto your Facebook.
I need to figure out, the one problem I'm having trying to teach myself how to do all this stuff is that I have no idea how to, from Zoom, schedule an event. There you go. So that's the problem I'm having. But check the church's Facebook page, check my Facebook page, and something will go up there, and the church's website. Something will go up there at some point. So there you go.
Cool. I'm looking forward to that. That'd be good. And Andre is preaching at Gracenet. How weird is that? He's preaching at Gracenet this coming Sunday because his time zone works. So it's going to be live again. We would normally be preaching. I'd be preaching, but Andre's going to be preaching. Normally we'd have to fly him down. So this is going to be great. So join us for that if you want as well. If your time zone works to give you 2 church services. Crazy days. Stay safe, people. And we will chat again on Wednesday.